Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I truly appreciate all of the love and support you showed for our last little linguistics lesson. And so I'm back with another video talking about one of my all-time favorite subjects, linguistics. I know that I put up a poll asking what topic you would like to see next, and there was a lot of interest in child language acquisition, which I will definitely get to, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought that it makes sense to approach these topics in some sort of order and lay the foundations of at least phonology and syntax before talking about something like language acquisition. So while I will get to all of these topics, I want to do them in a particular order. So today, following on from last week's video about phonetics, today we will be talking about phonology. They are two related topics, but very different, and I'm really excited to talk about phonology today. As you can see, my background is very different. I recently moved, and nothing is set up yet, and so I'm currently in the basement where there's the least street noise, and it's also about 15 degrees cooler than the upstairs. I'm not quite sure how the acoustics in this space will be yet, but if you're watching this video, I've obviously decided that the sound quality was acceptable. So let me know what you think. In preparation for this video, I printed out the PowerPoint slides that I use when I teach this class, and there were 83 slides, and that's after I deleted the slides about group discussion and in-class assignments. So I don't know if we'll get through all of them today, but I'll do my best to get through as many as possible. This will be a primarily top-down video of me just going through the slides, so if that sounds interesting or relaxing to you, let's get straight to it. So to recap, last time we talked about phonetics, which is the study of the physical properties of speech sounds, how they are produced, how they are articulated, and the physical properties of sound waves of speech sounds. So we also talked about the International Phonetic Alphabet, specifically the IPA for English, American English. Although English has a rather large phonetic inventory, it does not have every sound that is possible in the world's languages. In fact, no language has every possible sound. For example, English has the alveolar retroflex liquid, but it doesn't have other sounds like the alveolar trill. It's hard to roll your R's while soft speaking. Or the uvular trill, that you might hear in French. In fact, English does not have any trilled sounds, although there are several possible trills. The sounds that are produced as part of a language are that language's phonetic inventory. All languages organize sounds in different ways, and phonetactic constraints are the restrictions of possible combinations of sounds in a given language. Phonetactic constraints are language specific. So for example, we might say Merry Christmas in English, but when transliterated into Hawaiian, it comes off as mele kalikimaka. This is because of the phonetactic constraints of the Hawaiian language, given their constraints around syllable structure and the phonetic inventory of Hawaiian. So up until now, we've been talking in general terms about different sounds, but we haven't actually talked about what sounds signal meaning differences and which don't. So for example, we know that pen, ben, den, and ten are different words, but we haven't talked about differences in sounds that are produced, such as the p sound in spot and in pot. If you hold your hand in front of your mouth and say spot, spot, and then you say pot, pot, you can feel a little puff of air when you say pot and not when you say spot. This means that these sounds are produced differently, even though we might consider them to be the same sound. Phonology is the study of how sounds are organized in the mind, how these sounds are organized into words, and also the distribution of sounds or phones and their variants within a language. Also, the ways that different sounds interact with different sound environments. Essentially, which sounds are meaningful and which sounds are not. So in phonetics, we study individual speech sounds of many languages and study the physical unit of sound. Whereas in phonology, we study sounds that are organized within a specific language, as opposed to comparing them across languages. And then we study the psychological unit of sound. So essentially, how are sounds organized within the speaker's mind? Sounds are continuous. So this means that they are non-discrete signals. There is no separation between sounds. So example, if I say hello everyone, it looks something like this if you were measuring the sound waves. There's no specific start and stop for the h, e, l, o, e, f, r, e, 1. That's just not how we talk. Speech sounds are continuous, but our minds have a way of breaking these speech sounds into discrete units. Since sounds are produced continuously, there are anticipatory effects. For example, the I in the sound lint gets some nasality from the upcoming nasal sound n, lint, lint. And the aspiration that happens at the beginning of words in keep and cope is due to them being at the beginning of a word. So in real life, it's impossible to tell exactly where one sound stops and another begins. However, speakers know exactly how to break sound signals into words and words into phones. So we know if I say hello everyone, that those are two words, and I can distinguish the sounds within those words. How do we do this? We do this through phonemes. Phonemes, or mental sound categories, are one major way of distinguishing individual sounds. Phonemes are a class of speech sounds that are considered by native speakers to be the same sound. We call them a class because it's made up of several different but similar sounds and they all belong to the same phoneme. So do you think that p and b belong to the same phoneme or not? No, they do not. Why is this? This is because they are meaningful sound differences. Although p and b have many similarities, they are both bilabial stops. They differ in voicedness, and we know that we can use them to distinguish between words. For example, the word pen and the word ben are different words. However, all sounds exist on a spectrum. If we say that P is over here and B is over here, there are many instances where they might sound more or less similar from each other. Phonemes are an abstract mental representation. This means that it is it is related to the physical properties of the sound, but they are mental categories that we use to put phones into different classes. They are more or less the important sounds of a language. They are unique to a particular language, so a sound that is phonemic in one language may not be phonemic in another language. They are sounds which are psychologically real to native speakers. They are the sounds that we pay attention to, and the sounds which make a difference in meaning. Allophones are the variants of a phoneme that are considered to be quote-unquote the same by speakers of a language. You can think of them as different pronunciations of the same phoneme. So for example, in English, aspirated and unaspirated and unaspirated stops are part of the same phoneme. Most native speakers essentially hear them as the same. So if you say pot and spot again, you might be able to hear that the two different p sounds are a little bit different, but you still consider them to be categories of the same sound. Similarly, in Japanese, there are many different sounds that are all considered to be part of the same r sound. So r, r, cantrell, and o are all allophones of the same phoneme r. Native speakers consider them to be the same. So even though and o are phonemic in English, they are not phonemic in Japanese. This is because phonemes are specific to a specific language. So we could look at allophones like this. We have one base category that is comprised of several different pronunciations of the same phoneme. There might be two variations of a phoneme, or there might be many variations of the same phoneme. But in English, we would say that unaspirated and aspirated p are allophones. They are allophones of each other. They are allophones of the same phoneme. So although allophones are considered the same sound, most people can hear the differences between allophones, even if you don't do so consciously. So Japanese speakers recognize the difference between the different sounds or the different r sounds, but they aren't considered meaningfully different. In English, we could say spit, spit, and most people will understand what we mean, but you'd likely say that it sounds like an odd pronunciation of spit. So allophones cannot signal difference in meaning, only phonemes can. So once again, if I say spit or spit, you can hear the difference, but it's not meaningful. So when we discover that two sounds don't cause a difference in meaning, we can make a statement about those two sounds. So in English, unaspirated and aspirated p are allophones of the same phoneme. In Japanese, ra, r, don't make me drill, and ol are allophones of the same phoneme. You can kind of think of allophones like Superman and Clark Kent. There are two variants of the same thing. So you could even say that unaspirated p is an alter ego of p. There are two variants of the same person, the same sound, the same phoneme. And also importantly, you'll never see them in the same place at the same time. So, phonetic information is written inside square brackets. The actual sound produced is written inside square brackets, and phonemes, the mental representation, are written inside slashes. So if we were representing the phonetic information, we'd see that the p sound in pit and spit are different, but phonemically, it's the same phoneme, and we don't need to represent the aspiration. So how do we know if two sounds are separate phonemes or allophones of the same phoneme? We do this through something called minimal pairs. Minimal pairs are pairs of words which differ in meaning and are identical in form except for one sound in the same position that differs between the words. So for example, loop and lute are minimal pairs. This part of the word is the exact same, and they only differ in one sound that is in the same location in the word. So loop and lute are minimal pairs, but tool and lute are not. Because this sound difference causes a difference in meaning, we can say that p and t must be separate phonemes in English. Loop does not have the same meaning as lute, and the only difference is whether it ends in a p or a t. Therefore, p and t are separate phonemes. If you find a minimal pair, you can prove that the two sounds are different phonemes. So if Spider-Man and Superman show up in the same place, we know that they are different people. However, if Clark Kent and Superman show up in the same place, that just wouldn't happen because we know that they are the same person. So two allophones of the same phoneme will not show up in the same place, with a few exceptions. So minimal pairs have sounds that are in contrastive distribution. If two sounds are contrastive in a language, then substituting one sound for another can change the meaning of a word. One of the best ways to determine whether two sounds are different phonemes is to try to find minimal pairs. There are a few gaps in the world's languages where we know that two sounds are different phonemes even though there are not minimal pairs because of just the word inventory. So for example, sh and zh in English are phonemic. They are considered to be different sounds, but there is no true minimal pair between sh and zh. However, there are near minimal pairs, like treasure and pressure, that can tell us that these two sounds are different phonemes. So, if there is a minimal pair, the two sounds that differ between the words are two instances of two different phonemes. So, for example, p and b are different phonemes because we might have the words pin and bin, which are minimal pairs. However, if there are no minimal pairs, no near minimal pairs, and the sounds share phonetic features, then the sounds are allophones of the same phoneme. So you might be able to say, well, there are no minimal pairs between p and zh, for instance. I don't necessarily know if that's true. However, p and zh do not share any phonetic features. P is a voiceless bilabial stop, and zh is a voiced postalveolar fricative. The phonemic inventory is the set of all phonemes in a given language. That is the phonemic inventory, and the phonemic inventory can be different than the phonetic inventory. The set of phonemes in a language is much smaller than the range of sounds that speakers can produce. We saw this, for example, with unaspirated and aspirated p. Those are two sounds that equal one phoneme. Sounds in different languages may belong to the same phonemes as they do in other languages, but not necessarily. The set of phonemes in a language is much smaller than the range of sounds its speakers can produce. So once again, for instance, p and p, or unaspirated and aspirated p, are two different productions of a sound, but they equal one phoneme. And sounds in different languages may not belong to the same phoneme as they do in other languages. So once again, in English, In English, ol and are phonemes. We can find the minimal pair. We can find the minimal pair lead and red, but they are not phonemes in Japanese. And phoneme inventories vary widely by language. So, for example, Hawaiian has a relatively small phoneme inventory, whereas Navajo has a very large phoneme inventory. An example of phonemes that exist in another language but not in English is the three-way distinction of sounds in Korean. These are separate phonemes, so we do have a minimal triplet. Bur means fire, pur means grass, and bur means horn. This is a three-way distinction that exists in Korean, but does not exist in English. So all of these sounds are different phonemes, and we know this because we can find minimal pairs between all of the sounds. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to talk about phonological processes. So these are common processes and rules that apply to classes of sounds. You will not see the handout. Sorry. So one phonological process is assimilation. This is the process that makes two adjacent sounds more alike with respect to their phonetic features. So a common form of assimilation is voicing assimilation. So devoicing is common next to voiceless consonants or word boundaries. In English, approximants become voiceless after voiceless stops. So proud and place, the and the sound become voiceless after a voiceless stop. If you just say and as in round or loud, and then say proud and plant, you can hear that there are differences between the pronunciations of those liquid sounds. And voicing is common between voiced sounds, especially vowels. So in some varieties of English, maybe not necessarily your variety of English, s becomes z between two vowels. So greasy might be pronounced as greasy, or Mrs. might be pronounced as Mrs. between two vowels. We also see place assimilation. So this is where a sound's place of articulation becomes more alike to a neighboring sound. So an example is nasal place assimilation. So nasals often undergo place assimilation. This is true in Spanish, even across word boundaries. This is also true in Korean. So in Korean, you have 국물, which is pronounced as 국물. I keep messing up my slashes. So a word that's written as 국물 is pronounced as 국물. And palatalization is very common before palatal consonants and high front vowels. So in English, want you becomes want you. Could you becomes could you. And race you becomes race you. So you hear this, want you, could you, race you, is very common when a consonant comes before a glide or a palatal sound. This also happens in Korean, and there are many examples of this in other languages. Dissimilation is the opposite. This is a process in which two adjacent sounds become less similar. And this is often done in order to make them easier to pronounce. So this is less common than assimilation. Assimilation is much more common. But in some varieties of English, a fricative and a fricative becomes a fricative stop, for example. So fifth, where two fricatives are put next to each other, might be pronounced as fifth, fifth. Or sixth might be pronounced as sixth, sixth. This is not true for every variety of English, but it is true for some varieties of English. Deletion is a phonological process in which a sound is eliminated. This is very common, especially in consonant clusters, in order to reduce complexity. So in English, we might hear "Jill-like-her," "Jill-like-her," instead of "Did you like her?" "Jill-like-her." And this is common in some Midwestern dialects of English. So police becomes "police," and terrific becomes "terrific." Epenthesis is the opposite of deletion. This is where a sound is inserted, and once again, this is much less common than its counterpart. However, English does have voiceless stop epenthesis. So when a when a nasal sound is followed by a fricative, we often insert a voiceless stop. We hear this in hamster, or strength, or prince. Instead of saying hamster, strength, or prince. In fact, it's actually very difficult for me to say strength. I want to say strength, where I insert a voiceless stop between the ng and th sound. And the stop that is inserted is dependent on the following nasal. So here we have a bilabial nasal and a bilabial stop is inserted. Here we have a velar nasal and a velar stop is inserted. Here we have an alveolar nasal where an alveolar stop is inserted. And then finally, metathesis is a phonological process in which two segments or syllables switch positions in a word. So in many instances, sounds metathesize in order to make words easier to pronounce or understand. So in English, the word prescription is often pronounced as prescription. And in Leti, an Austronesian language, you might see entire syllables switch places even across word boundaries. So our types of phonological processes are assimilation, dissimilation, epenthesis, deletion, and metathesis. We will skip phonological rule of ordering for now and talk a little bit about syllables. Syllables are made up of a couple different parts. A syllable is made up of an onset and a rhyme, and the rhyme is made up of the nucleus and the coda. Every syllable has a nucleus, which is the central part of a syllable. The nucleus of a syllable is usually a vowel, but it is occasionally something like a syllabic or a syllabic or some nasal sounds. Vowels are only ever nuclei. They can't be onsets or codas, whereas some consonants can be either a nucleus or an onset or a coda. In English, a few sonorant sounds can also serve as nuclei when there is no vowel. And in English, only consonants can be onsets or codas. The onset and the coda surround the nucleus. So the onset is the beginning of a syllable, which comes before a nucleus, and the coda is the sound after a syllable, that is part of the rhyme. Both onsets and codas can be made up of one or more consonants, particularly in English. An open syllable is a syllable with no coda, so just a consonant or a vowel, or a consonant, consonant, and a vowel. And closed syllables are a syllable that has a coda, so no coda versus coda. So vowel, consonant, consonant, or consonant, vowel, consonant. Each language has its own phonotactic constraints. So English has a very large variety of possible syllables. We can have just a vowel as in I, or A, or A. We can have a consonant and a vowel as in the or no. A consonant, consonant, vowel as in stay. A consonant, 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 vowel. A consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, and more. English has a particularly unconstrained syllable structure. Some languages have more constrained syllable structures. So for example, Hawaiian only allows for 4 possible kinds of syllables, and Japanese only allows for 3 possible kinds of syllables. So the kinds of syllables that are possible will depend on your language. We'll leave it here for today. If you have more questions about phonology, please feel free to ask them in the comments, and I will do my best to give you a satisfying answer. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. But for now, good night, good night, good night.